The boy was only 4 years old when he lost everything. His mother passed away from an illness that took her too quickly, and his father had already left long before that. There was no one to take him in. No grandparents, no aunts or uncles. Just a small child standing in a hospital hallway, holding a social worker's hand, wondering why his mother wouldn't wake up. That was how Eliah's journey began. A journey that no child should ever have to walk. The foster care system became his home, if you could even call it that. Over the next 8 years, he moved from one house to another, 7 different homes, 7 different beds, 7 different families who promised things would be different this time. But promises, he learned, were just words that adults said to make themselves feel better. Some of the homes were okay. The people were kind enough. They gave him food and a place to sleep, but he always felt like a guest who had overstayed his welcome, like a package that had been delivered to the wrong address. He never unpacked his bags fully. He never hung pictures on the walls, because he knew, sooner or later, he would be moving again. Other homes were harder. There were houses where he was just another check from the government, a number, a mouth to feed, nothing more. In those places, he learned to stay quiet. He learned to make himself small. He learned that if he didn't ask for anything, he wouldn't be disappointed when he didn't get it. By the time Eliah turned 12, he had attended 5 different schools. Making friends felt pointless. Why bother getting close to someone when you would just have to say goodbye? So he stopped trying. He sat in the back of every classroom. He ate lunch alone. He walked through the hallways like a ghost. And most days, that's exactly how he felt. At his newest school, Riverside Middle, things were no different. The building was old and the paint was peeling off the walls. The kids there had their own groups, their own circles, and none of those circles had room for a boy like him. He could hear them whispering sometimes, in the cafeteria, in the locker rooms, in the hallways between classes. That's the foster kid. I heard he doesn't have any parents. Why does he always wear the same clothes? The words stung, but Eliah had been stung so many times before that he barely flinched anymore. He had built walls around his heart. Thick walls, high walls. The kind that kept the hurt out, but also kept everything else out too. His clothes were second-hand. Most of them came from donation bins or thrift stores. His shoes had small holes near the toes, and when it rained, his socks would get wet. He carried everything he owned in a single backpack. A few shirts, a pair of jeans, a toothbrush, and a small photograph of his mother that he kept hidden in the front pocket. Sometimes, late at night, he would take out that photograph and just look at it. She had kind eyes and a warm smile. He didn't remember much about her anymore, just flashes. The smell of her perfume, the sound of her humming while she cooked, the way she used to call him her little star. He missed her so much it hurt. The foster home he was staying in now belonged to a woman named Mrs. Patterson. She was a tired woman in her 50s who had 3 other foster kids in the house. She wasn't mean, but she wasn't warm either. She made sure everyone had dinner and got to school on time. But that was about it. There were no bedtime stories, no hugs, no one asking how his day went. Eliah didn't blame her. She had her hands full. And besides, he had stopped expecting those things a long time ago. But there was one thing in that house that changed everything for him. In the garage, pushed into a dark corner and covered with a dusty sheet, there was an old piano. It had been there for years, forgotten and untouched. Mrs. Patterson said it belonged to her late husband, and she had never had the heart to get rid of it. One night when everyone else was asleep, Eliah couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with thoughts he couldn't quiet. So he crept downstairs, through the kitchen, and into the garage. He pulled the sheet off the piano and just stood there, staring at it. He had never played a piano before. He didn't know the first thing about music, but something about those black and white keys called out to him. Something deep inside him wanted to touch them, so he did. The first note he played echoed through the silent garage. It was just one note, simple, alone, but it made him feel something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt heard. From that night on, the piano became his secret world. Every night, after everyone went to bed, he would sneak into the garage and teach himself to play. He didn't have a teacher. He didn't have books. All he had was an old cracked phone he had found in a drawer and free videos on the internet. He watched those videos over and over again. He paused them. He rewound them. He practiced the same simple songs hundreds of times until his fingers ached and his eyes burned from exhaustion. But he didn't stop, because when he played, he wasn't the orphan anymore. He wasn't the kid with the second-hand clothes and the holes in his shoes. He wasn't invisible. When he played, he was someone. The piano didn't judge him. It didn't whisper behind his back. It didn't look at him with pity or disgust. It just listened. And the more he played, the more it gave back to him. Every melody he learned felt like a small victory. Every chord he mastered felt like proof that he could do something right. Music became his voice, the voice he never had. All the pain he carried inside, all the loneliness, all the sadness, he poured it into those keys. And somehow it made the weight a little easier to bear. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, without anyone knowing, Elijah got better, much better. He moved past the simple songs and started playing more difficult pieces. He even started making up his own melodies, little tunes that came from somewhere deep inside him, tunes that told stories without words. Then one afternoon, something happened that would change the direction of his life forever. He was walking through the school hallway, head down as usual, when he saw a bright yellow flyer pinned to the bulletin board. He almost walked past it, but something made him stop. The flyer said, "Annual Talent Show. All students welcome." Elijah read those words again and again. His heart started beating faster. A talent show, a chance to perform, a chance to be seen. He thought about the piano. He thought about all those nights alone in the garage. He thought about the music that lived inside him, waiting to come out. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Elijah felt something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. It was small, fragile, like a tiny flame in a dark room. But it was there. He didn't know what would happen if he signed up. He didn't know if anyone would care. He didn't even know if he was good enough. But standing there in that hallway, staring at that flyer, he made a decision. He was going to try. Because maybe, just maybe, this was his chance to finally be heard. Elijah stood in front of that flyer for what felt like forever. His eyes kept reading the same words over and over. Annual Talent Show. All students welcome. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. All students welcome. Did that really include someone like him? He looked around the hallway. Kids were walking past him, laughing with their friends, talking about weekend plans and homework and all the normal things normal kids talked about. None of them noticed him standing there. None of them ever did. But maybe that could change. He thought about it all day. In class, he couldn't focus. The teacher's voice faded into the background while his mind kept drifting back to that flyer. What if he actually did it? What if he actually signed up and performed in front of the whole school? The idea terrified him, but it also made him feel alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. After his last class ended, Elijah made his way back to the bulletin board. The hallway was mostly empty now. Just a few students grabbing things from their lockers before heading home. He stood in front of the sign-up sheet and stared at the names already written there. 12 names, singers, dancers, a comedy act, a magic show. His hand was shaking as he picked up the pen that hung from a string next to the sheet. He could hear his own breathing, fast and shallow. His fingers tightened around the pen. Just write your name, he told himself. Just write it and walk away. So he did. Elijah. Piano. The letters looked small and messy compared to the others, but they were there. His name was on that list. There was no taking it back now. He let out a long breath and stepped away from the board. For a moment, he felt something close to pride. He had done it. He had actually done it. But that feeling didn't last long. Well, well. What do we have here? The voice came from behind him, sharp, cold, dripping with amusement. Elijah turned around and felt his stomach drop. Mrs. Hargrove, the music teacher. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore glasses that sat low on her nose, and she had a way of looking at people like she was measuring their worth and finding them lacking. She had been teaching music at Riverside for over 20 years, and everyone knew she only cared about one kind of student: the talented ones, the ones who came from good families, the ones who had taken private lessons since they were 5 years old. Kids like Elijah didn't exist in her world. She walked closer, her heels clicking against the floor. Her eyes moved from Elijah to the sign-up sheet and back again. A small smile curled at the corner of her lips. But it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile that made you feel 2 inches tall. "You signed up for my talent show?" she asked. Her voice was light, almost playful, but there was something underneath it, something cruel. Elijah nodded. He couldn't find his voice. Mrs. Hargrove tilted her head and looked at him the way someone might look at a stain on their shirt. She took in his wrinkled clothes, his worn-out shoes, his messy hair that he had tried to comb down that morning but had given up on. "And what exactly do you plan to do?" she asked. "Sing? Dance?" She let out a short laugh. "Wait, don't tell me. You're going to play an instrument." "Piano," Elijah said quietly. His voice came out smaller than he wanted it to. Mrs. Hargrove's eyebrows shot up. "Piano?" She repeated the word like it was the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard. "You play the piano?" He nodded again. She crossed her arms and leaned back slightly, studying him with those cold eyes. "And where exactly did you learn to play? Do you take lessons? Do you have a teacher?" "No," Elijah admitted. "I taught myself." For a moment, Mrs. Hargrove just stared at him. Then she laughed. Not a small laugh. A real laugh. The kind that echoed through the empty hallway and bounced off the walls. "You taught yourself," she repeated, shaking her head. "That's adorable, really. It is." Elijah felt his face getting hot. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. A few students who had been nearby stopped to watch. He could see them out of the corner of his eye, watching, listening, waiting to see what would happen next. Mrs. Hargrove took a step closer. Her voice dropped, but it was still loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let me give you some advice, sweetheart. This talent show isn't a joke. It's not some little game where anyone can walk up on stage and make a fool of themselves. The students who perform in my show have real talent. They've trained for years. They come from families who understand the value of discipline and hard work." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You?" She looked him up and down one more time. "You don't belong here. You never did. And signing your name on a piece of paper isn't going to change that." The hallway was completely silent now. Elijah could feel the eyes of the other students on him. He could hear someone snicker quietly behind him. His throat felt tight. His eyes burned. But he refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of her. Mrs. Hargrove smiled again, satisfied with herself. She reached past him and tapped the sign-up sheet with one perfectly manicured finger. "Do yourself a favor," she said softly. "Erase your name before you embarrass yourself. Trust me. I've been doing this for 23 years. I know talent when I see it." She leaned in just a little closer. "And I don't see it in you." Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking down the hallway until she disappeared around the corner. Elijah stood frozen. His whole body felt numb. The whispers started almost immediately. Did you hear what she said? I can't believe he thought he could actually perform. He probably doesn't even know how to read music. One boy walked past him and muttered just loud enough for him to hear. Stick to being invisible, foster kid. It's what you're good at. More laughter, more whispers, more eyes looking at him like he was something to be pitied. Or worse, something to be laughed at. Eliah's vision blurred. He wanted to run. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to go back to the garage and hide in the only place that had ever felt safe. But something kept him standing there. He turned back to the sign-up sheet. His name was still there, written in his shaky handwriting. Eliah. Piano. He could erase it. It would be so easy. Just grab the eraser, wipe away those letters, and pretend none of this ever happened. Go back to being invisible. Go back to being no one. That's what Mrs. Hargrove expected him to do. That's what everyone expected him to do. His hand reached toward the sheet, but then he stopped. He thought about his mother. About that photograph he kept hidden in his backpack. About the way she used to call him her little star. He thought about all those nights in the garage, all those hours teaching himself to play, all the pain and loneliness he had poured into those keys. Was he really going to let one woman take that away from him? Was he really going to let her words be the final answer? No. Eliah pulled his hand back. He didn't erase his name. Instead, he picked up his backpack, turned around, and walked out of that hallway, with his head held just a little bit higher than before. Mrs. Hargrove thought she knew him. She thought she could look at his clothes and his shoes and his messy hair and know exactly who he was and what he was capable of, but she didn't know anything. She didn't know about the nights he spent practicing until his fingers bled. She didn't know about the music that lived inside him, fighting to get out. She didn't know about the fire that had just been lit in his chest. A fire that her words hadn't put out. A fire that her words had only made stronger. Eliah walked home that afternoon with tears in his eyes but steel in his heart. He was going to prove her wrong. He was going to prove all of them wrong. And when he finally stepped onto that stage, they would have no choice but to listen. That night, Eliah didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Mrs. Hargrove's voice echoing in his head. You don't belong here. I don't see it in you. The words played over and over like a song stuck on repeat. But instead of letting those words crush him, he did something else with them. He used them. At midnight, when the whole house was silent and dark, Eliah crept out of his room. He moved slowly, carefully, avoiding the spots on the floor that creaked. He had memorized them by now. Third step from the top, the corner near the bathroom, the loose board by the kitchen door. He made it to the garage without making a sound. The old piano was waiting for him, just like it always was. He pulled back the dusty sheet and sat down on the bench. The wood was cold. The garage smelled like oil and old boxes. But to Eliah, this place was more beautiful than any concert hall in the world. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play. At first, he played the songs he already knew, simple melodies he had learned from videos online. But tonight, they weren't enough. Tonight, he needed more. So he started playing something different, something that came from deep inside him. Notes he had never played before. A melody that didn't exist until his fingers found it. It was slow at first. Sad. Like the sound of rain falling on an empty street. It was the sound of all those years spent alone. All those homes that were never really home. All those people who looked right through him like he wasn't even there. But then the melody began to shift. It grew stronger, deeper. There was pain in it, yes. But there was something else, too. Something that sounded like fight. Like stubborn, desperate hope that refused to die. Eliah played until his fingers hurt, until his arms ached and his back was sore from hunching over the keys. He played until the first light of morning started creeping through the small window in the garage. And when he finally stopped, he knew what he was going to perform at the talent show. He was going to play this, his own music, his own story. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of his life. Every day at school, the whispers followed him. News had spread fast about what happened in the hallway. The foster kid who thought he could play piano. The nobody who had the nerve to sign up for Mrs. Hargrove's talent show. Some kids just stared. Others laughed. A few went out of their way to make his life miserable. "Hey, piano boy," one kid called out during lunch. "You gonna play us a little song? Maybe something sad about not having a family?" His friends burst out laughing. Elijah kept his head down and kept walking. He had learned a long time ago that fighting back only made things worse, so he swallowed the anger. He buried the hurt, and he kept moving. Mrs. Hargrove was even worse. Every time she saw him in the hallway, she would give him that same cold smile. That look that said she was just waiting for him to fail. "Still planning to go through with it?" she asked him one afternoon. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. "There's still time to back out. No one would blame you. In fact, they might respect you more for knowing your limits." Elijah didn't answer. He just looked at her for a moment, then walked away. He could feel her eyes on his back as he left. He could almost hear what she was thinking. Foolish boy. He'll learn. But he wasn't going to learn the lesson she wanted to teach him. He was going to teach her one instead. Every single night, Elijah practiced. It didn't matter how tired he was. It didn't matter how much homework he had or how early he had to wake up. As soon as the house went quiet, he was in that garage, sitting at that piano, playing until he couldn't feel his fingers anymore. Some nights, his hands cramped so badly he had to stop and shake them out. Other nights, his eyes burned from exhaustion, and the notes on his phone screen blurred together. But he never quit. Not once. He practiced the same piece over and over again, the one he had created that first night. He added to it. He shaped it. He poured every single emotion he had into those notes until the music felt like a living thing. He called it invisible, because that's what he had been his whole life. Invisible to the families who took him in, invisible to the kids at school, invisible to teachers like Mrs. Hargrove who looked at him and saw nothing worth believing in. But music had a way of making the invisible visible, and when he played, he wasn't invisible anymore. One night, something unexpected happened. Elijah was in the middle of practicing when he heard a sound behind him. He spun around, his heart jumping into his throat, and saw Mrs. Patterson standing in the doorway of the garage. She was wearing her bathrobe, her hair messy from sleep. She had a strange expression on her face. Not angry, not annoyed. Something else. Something Elijah couldn't quite read. He froze, waiting for her to tell him to stop, to go back to bed, to stop making noise in the middle of the night. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she just stood there for a long moment, looking at him. Then, without a word, she walked over to a small table near the door, set something down, and turned to leave. Elijah looked at what she had left. A glass of water, and a small sandwich wrapped in a napkin. He stared at it, not quite understanding. No one had ever done something like that for him before, such a small thing. But it hit him harder than he expected. Mrs. Patterson paused at the door. She still didn't say anything. But before she left, she gave him a small nod, just a tiny movement of her head. Like she was saying, "I see you. Keep going." Then she was gone. Elijah sat there in the silence, his chest tight with emotion. He picked up the glass of water and took a long drink. Then he turned back to the piano and kept playing. The night before the talent show, Elijah couldn't eat. His stomach was a mess of knots and nerves. He sat through dinner without tasting a single bite, his mind already on tomorrow. What if he messed up? What if he forgot the notes? What if he got on that stage and froze in front of everyone? What if Mrs. Hargrove was right? The doubts came at him like waves, one after another. He tried to push them away, but they kept coming back. That night, he went to the garage one last time. He sat down at the piano, but he didn't play right away. He just sat there, staring at the keys, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the photograph of his mother. Her face looked back at him. That warm smile. Those kind eyes. He could almost hear her voice in his head, soft and gentle. "You're my little star, Elia. Don't ever forget that." A tear rolled down his cheek. Then another. He placed the photograph on the piano, right where he could see it. Then he put his fingers on the keys. And he played. He played invisible from beginning to end, and this time it was different. This time, every single note was perfect. Every emotion was right where it needed to be. The sadness, the loneliness, the hope, the fight. When he finished, the garage was silent. But inside him, something had changed. He wasn't scared anymore. Tomorrow, he would walk onto that stage. Tomorrow, he would sit in front of that piano with hundreds of eyes watching him. Tomorrow, Mrs. Hargrove would be sitting in the front row, waiting for him to fail. But he wasn't going to fail. He was going to show them all who he really was, and nothing was going to stop him. The morning of the talent show arrived too quickly. Elia woke up before his alarm went off. His eyes opened in the darkness, and he just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling his heart already beating fast. Today was the day. After all those nights in the garage, after all those whispers and stares and cruel words, after everything, today he would finally know if it was all worth it. He got dressed slowly. His hands were shaking as he buttoned his shirt. It was the nicest one he owned. A simple white button-down that Mrs. Patterson had bought him for a school picture day last year. It was a little too big for him, but it was clean and it didn't have any holes. He looked at himself in the small mirror on the back of his door. The boy staring back at him looked tired, scared, small, but there was something else in those eyes too, something that hadn't been there before. Determination. The school day dragged on forever. Every class felt like it lasted 100 years. Elia couldn't focus on anything. The teachers' voices sounded far away like they were speaking underwater. All he could think about was the auditorium, the stage, the piano. During lunch, he didn't eat. He sat alone at his usual table in the corner of the cafeteria, his stomach too twisted up to handle food. A few kids walked by and made comments, but he barely heard them. Their voices were just noise now, background static. None of it mattered. Only tonight mattered. Finally, the last bell rang. Students poured out of classrooms, excited and loud. The talent show was the biggest event of the year, and everyone was buzzing about it. Who would win? Who would embarrass themselves? It was all anyone could talk about. Elia made his way to the auditorium. The backstage area was already crowded with performers. Singers warming up their voices, dancers stretching in the corners, a group of kids practicing a comedy routine, laughing at their own jokes. No one talked to Elia. No one even looked at him. He found a quiet spot near the back and sat down on an old wooden chair, his hands clasped together in his lap. He could hear the auditorium filling up on the other side of the curtain. Hundreds of voices, parents, teachers, students, all of them out there waiting. His chest felt tight, his mouth was dry. For a moment he thought about running, just getting up and walking out the back door and never looking back. No one would notice, no one would care. But then he thought about his mother, about her photograph, which he had tucked safely in his pocket, about all those nights at the piano when the music was the only thing that made him feel alive. He wasn't going to run. The show began at 7 o'clock sharp. One by one, the performers took the stage. A girl sang a popular song and the crowd cheered. A group of boys did a dance routine with flashing lights and the audience clapped along. A magician pulled cards from thin air and made a stuffed rabbit appear from an empty hat. Each act got applause. Each performer smiled and waved and soaked in the attention. Elijah watched from the side of the stage, hidden in the shadows. His turn was coming. He could feel it getting closer with every act that finished. Then he heard a voice that made his blood run cold. "Well, looks like you actually showed up." He turned around. Mrs. May Hargrove was standing there, clipboard in hand, that familiar cold smile on her face. She looked him up and down, taking in his oversized shirt and his nervous expression. "I have to admit I'm surprised," she said. "I really thought you'd come to your senses by now." She tilted her head. "There's still time, you know. You can walk away. Save yourself the humiliation." Elijah looked at her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Mrs. Hargrove's smile flickered just for a second. Then she shrugged and walked away. "Your funeral," she said over her shoulder. A few minutes later, the announcer's voice echoed through the auditorium. "And now, please welcome our next performer, Elijah, playing an original composition on the piano." Original composition. The words hung in the air. He heard a few murmurs from the crowd. A few confused whispers. This was it. Elijah stood up. His legs felt like jelly. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He walked toward the stage, one step at a time, the curtain brushing against his shoulder as he passed through. The spotlight hit him like a wave of heat. He blinked, temporarily blinded. As his eyes adjusted, he saw them. Hundreds of faces staring at him from the darkness. Parents with programs in their laps. Students leaning forward in their seats. Teachers standing along the walls. And in the front row, right in the center, sat Mrs. Hargrove. Her arms were crossed. Her expression was smug. She looked like someone waiting for a car crash. Elijah walked to the piano. A beautiful grand piano shining under the stage lights, so different from the old dusty one in the garage. But the keys were the same, black and white, waiting for him. He sat down on the bench. The auditorium fell silent, so silent he could hear his own breathing. His hands were trembling. He placed them on the keys, but they wouldn't stop shaking. Panic started to rise in his chest. What if he couldn't do it? What if he froze? What if everything he had worked for fell apart right here, right now? He closed his eyes, and in that moment he stopped thinking about the crowd. He stopped thinking about Mrs. Hargrove. He stopped thinking about all the people who had ever doubted him or mocked him or made him feel like he was nothing. He thought about his mother. He thought about her voice, her smile, the way she used to hold him when he was small. "You're my little star." Elijah opened his eyes, and he began to play. The first notes of Invisible floated through the auditorium like a whisper, soft, gentle, fragile. The sound of a child standing alone in a hospital hallway. The sound of a boy packing his bags again and again. The sound of silence in rooms full of people who never saw him. The audience went still. The melody grew. It deepened. It became something heavier. The pain of being unwanted, the ache of loneliness that never went away. Every rejection, every cruel word, every night spent wondering why he wasn't enough. In the third row, a woman put her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were glistening. Then the music shifted. It rose. It built. It became something stronger, something fierce. The sound of a boy who refused to give up. The sound of fingers bleeding on piano keys at 2 in the morning. The sound of a heart that kept beating no matter how many times it was broken. The melody soared through the auditorium like a fire catching wind. It filled every corner, every seat, every heart in that room. Elijah played like he had never played before. His fingers danced across the keys with a life of their own. He wasn't thinking anymore. He was just feeling. Every emotion he had ever buried, every tear he had never let fall, it all poured out through the music. In the front row, Mrs. Hargrove's smug expression slowly faded, her arms uncrossed, her mouth opened slightly. A man near the back wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He hadn't cried in years. A teenage girl gripped her mother's arm, tears streaming down her face. And still, Elia played. The final notes came slowly, softly. Like the last light of sunset fading over the horizon, like a promise that tomorrow would come. When his fingers lifted from the keys, the auditorium was completely silent. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then someone in the back started clapping, then another person, and suddenly the entire auditorium erupted. The applause was deafening. People were standing up, they were cheering, they were calling his name. Elia sat frozen at the piano, unable to move. He had never heard anything like this. He had never felt anything like this. He looked out at the crowd and saw faces he didn't recognize crying. He saw people on their feet, clapping with everything they had. He saw students who had mocked him now, staring at him with wide eyes and open mouths. And in the front row, he saw Mrs. Hargrove. She wasn't clapping. She wasn't smiling. She was just sitting there, staring at him. And for the first time, there was no coldness in her eyes. There was only shock. The applause didn't stop. Elia sat at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys, his whole body trembling. The sound washed over him like a wave he couldn't escape. Clapping, cheering, people calling his name. It was so loud it almost hurt. He didn't know what to do. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times in his head, but nothing had prepared him for how it would actually feel. For 12 years he had been invisible. For 12 years no one had seen him. And now hundreds of people were on their feet, looking right at him, seeing him. Slowly he stood up from the bench. His legs were shaking so badly he wasn't sure they would hold him. He turned to face the crowd, and the applause got even louder. People were wiping their eyes. Parents were hugging their children. Students who had never spoken a word to him were clapping until their hands turned red. Elia didn't know what to say, so he just stood there, tears streaming down his face, and let himself feel it. For the first time in his life, he felt like he mattered. The rest of the show passed in a blur. A few more acts performed after him, but Elia barely noticed. He sat backstage in a daze, still trying to process what had just happened. People kept coming up to him. Students he had never talked to, parents he had never met. They shook his hand. They patted his shoulder. They told him things like, "That was incredible," and "I've never heard anything like that." He nodded and smiled and said thank you, but the words didn't feel real. None of it felt real. Finally, the show ended, and everyone gathered on stage for the results. The principal, a kind older man with gray hair and glasses, walked to the microphone. He held a small golden trophy in his hands and smiled out at the crowd. "What a night," he said, and the audience clapped in agreement. "We've seen so much incredible talent. Every single performer should be proud of themselves." More applause. Elia stood at the back of the group, trying to make himself small. Old habits. "But now," the principal continued, "it's time to announce our winner." He paused, looking down at the card in his hand. Then he looked up with a wide smile. "This year's first place goes to someone who reminded us all why music matters. Someone who played not just with skill, but with heart. Someone who made every single person in this room feel something." He turned and looked directly at Elia. "Elia, please come forward." The crowd exploded again. Elia felt hands pushing him gently toward the front of the stage. His feet moved on their own. Before he knew it, he was standing next to the principal, and the golden trophy was being placed in his hands. It was heavier than he expected. He looked down at it, then out at the audience. All those faces, all those people who had just watched him bare his soul on that stage. And they were cheering for him. Him, The orphan, the foster kid, the boy with holes in his shoes and second-hand clothes. The one Mrs. Hargrove said didn't belong. He belonged now. After the ceremony, people crowded around him. Teachers congratulated him. Students asked him questions. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. But there was one person who didn't come up to him. Elia spotted her near the edge of the auditorium, standing alone. Mrs. Hargrove. She was watching him from a distance, her face unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met. Elia expected to feel anger. He expected to feel the urge to walk over and say something, to throw her words back in her face, to remind her of everything she had said. But he didn't feel any of that. He just felt tired. And strangely, he felt something close to peace. Mrs. Hargrove looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something Elia never expected. She nodded. It was small, almost invisible, but it was there. A tiny acknowledgement, a silent admission that she had been wrong. Then she turned and walked out of the auditorium. Elia watched her go. He didn't need an apology. He didn't need her to say the words out loud. That nod was enough. He had proven what he needed to prove, not to her, to himself. A few minutes later, as the crowd started to thin out, a man approached Elia. He was tall, well-dressed, wearing a dark suit that looked more expensive than anything Elia had ever seen. He had kind eyes and a warm smile. "That was something special," the man said. "I mean it. I've been in the music industry for over 20 years and I've never heard a young person play like that." Elia blinked, not sure what to say. "Thank you," he managed. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small white card. "My name is Mr. Chen. I'm a music producer. I came here tonight to watch my niece perform." He chuckled softly. "But you're the one I can't stop thinking about." He held out the card. Elia took it with trembling fingers. "That piece you played," Mr. Chen continued. "Did you write it yourself?" Elia nodded. Mr. Chen's smile grew wider. "I thought so. There's something in that music. Something real, something the world needs to hear." He paused, looking at Elia with serious eyes. "I'd like to help you share it, if you're interested." Elia stared at the card in his hand. It had a phone number, an email address, a logo of a record company he didn't recognize. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to kids like him. But it was happening. "Call me," Mr. Chen said. "When you're ready. I think you have a future in this, young man. A big one." Then he smiled one more time, patted Elia on the shoulder, and walked away. 1 year later, Elia released his first album. He called it Invisible No More. It reached #1 in 12 countries. Music critics called it a masterpiece of emotion and honesty. Radio stations played his songs on repeat. People who had never met him wrote letters saying his music had changed their lives. But Elia never forgot where he came from. He donated half of everything he earned to programs that helped foster children. He funded music education in schools that couldn't afford it. He visited orphanages and sat down with kids who reminded him of himself, and he told them the same thing every time. "You matter. Don't let anyone tell you different." He was interviewed hundreds of times. Magazines, talk shows, podcasts, and in every single interview someone would ask him the same question. "How did you get here? How did you go from being a foster kid with nothing to one of the most celebrated young musicians in the world?" And every time, Elia would smile and give the same answer. "Someone once told me I didn't belong. She looked at my clothes and my shoes and my messy hair, and she decided I wasn't worth believing in. For a long time, I almost believed her." He would pause, letting the words settle. But here's the thing. She was wrong. And so is anyone who tells you that you're not enough. You don't need permission to follow your dreams. You don't need someone else to believe in you first. You just need to believe in yourself. He would lean forward, looking straight into the camera. I was invisible my whole life. Nobody saw me. Nobody heard me. But I didn't let that stop me. I found a piano in a dusty garage, and I taught myself to play. I practiced until my fingers bled. And when they told me I didn't have what it takes, I got back up and proved them wrong. His voice would grow quiet but firm. So if you're out there right now, feeling like nobody cares, feeling like you'll never be anything, I want you to hear me. You are not invisible. You have something inside you that the world needs. And one day, if you keep going, you'll find your stage. He would smile. And when you do, they'll have no choice but to listen.